So we're in this series entitled Subscribe, Buying Into What's Important. And we're walking through our values for this series as a church. Like our mission, I shared this with you last week or a couple weeks ago, is to intentionally cross paths with unconnected people in order to connect them with Jesus. So that is what we do. Values are kind of the how we're going to do that. And our values really in the end are how we want to be, how we want to think, how we want to behave, and how we want people to see us. Like I hope when people talk about Church of the Crossroads, they say, man, that church is, and they mention one of our values. For example, one of our very first value is we believe there's hope for everyone. And because we believe that, because that's one of our values, we walk through life trying to see people through the eyes of Jesus, trying to love people in the way that Jesus loved them. So it's this mindset of seeing them as worth it and looking for an opportunity to connect with them and ultimately connect them with Jesus. So that's our first value. I hope people see that in us or feel that from us. Our second value is this. We contribute more than we consume. We contribute more than we consume. So we value more than just these two things. We believe there's hope for everyone. We contribute more than we consume. And I'll talk about two more after this week. But we value more than just these two things. But these are just some ways that we want to be different. These are values that in some ways combat our culture and our ways that we creatively work to make Jesus famous and share the gospel with our neighbors and love our city. So these are our values. And so this morning I want to talk about we contribute more than we consume. And I hope that when people talk about our church, we have loved them well and we've been generous so well and so often that people go, that's that church that cut my grass a month ago. That's that church that gave away that car, right? Those are our values. That's kind of the purpose of them. So when Christ grabs our heart, and this is why these things should happen. When Christ grabs our heart, something radical takes place. Like a transformation occurs. There's something different in us than the norm in society. And so when Christ takes hold of our lives, we begin to live through or under a new message. And so if you have your Bibles, turn to Acts chapter 2. Or it will be here on the screen, or punch it in on your phone. Acts chapter 2. In this chapter, there is this community that is gripped by Jesus. It was, and when we read this story, it's maybe one of the most incredible stories of transformation that you'll read about in Scripture, and it is one of the most radical transformations that the world has ever seen. It was unprecedented. Like an entire community of people who 1 minute live under a certain set of values, they are then gripped by the message and the life of Jesus, and the next minute they immediately begin living under another set of values. They adopted a whole new way of living. So I want us to study this community and maybe figure out how we could or should be like this community. So here's the story. It's Acts chapter 4, beginning with verse 32. It says, all the believers, so here's this community of people who know Jesus, have experienced Jesus, and have subscribed to Jesus. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and much grace was upon them all. There were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned lands or houses sold them. They brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and then it was distributed to anyone as he had need. This is the story of this community. And something crazy is happening here. Now, I hope you caught this. No one saw any of their possessions as their own. Now, that's unnatural. Don't you think? That's unnatural. Like think about this. What's a 2-year-old's favorite word? Mine, absolutely. And I think as we get older, it may still be our favorite word, but we just don't say it out loud. You know what I mean? Like, we still think that. And this thinking is the source of all kinds, really, of envy and anxiety and greed. It's really this idea of this is mine, these things are mine, is the root of consumerism. Philosophers and thinkers have put a lot of thought into these problems, and they've tried to come up with solutions to envy, anxiety, and greed. There was a French thinker whose last name was Rousseau, and he said about this: man in his primitive state, in nature, like when men were savages, in their primitive state, they were content. The problem came in, says Rousseau, when the first man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, thought to himself, saying, "This is mine." The first guy who claimed land as his own, in some ways became the problem, started the problem. So whoever was the first man to do this was the founder of what we would now call civil society, with all its crimes and murders and wars, and it's all over possession or power over possession. But in this passage in Acts, this community of people, right, they owned property, so they consumed in some way, so they still owned stuff. In verse 34 it says from time to time somebody who owned something, and most of them didn't own much, but it says from time to time somebody who owned something, whether it was land or a house, they would sell it and they would bring the money in. We also learn about this community that they had houses, they owned houses, because it tells us that from time to time they would invite people over to their homes for fellowship, and so that people could worship God in their dwelling, in their home. So they didn't necessarily live a minimalist lifestyle. They just used their resources for the good of all. So this first community of believers, they handled their stuff in a new way. Their paradigm was changed. They were generous with it. They shared it. Their attitude toward one another and their attitude toward their stuff was counter to culture. As an extended family, and for us as an extended family of these Christ followers, there are some important principles that I think we need to glean from this, learn from this, and even model. And the first one is how, the primary one is how we should handle our stuff. So the truth about stuff that I think helps us move forward to becoming better contributors and fight self-centered consumerism is this. This is what this first community, this first church really modeled and believed. The first truth about stuff is this: I have God's stuff. The stuff I have is not my own. It was given to me, lent to me by God Himself. And we see this in this first community. Like, their attitude was, it's not my stuff, it's not your stuff, it's not the leader's stuff. Whose stuff is it? It's God's stuff. And these first Christians had come to grips with the ownership issue. Who owns what I have? God. It's all His. And if you can come to that realization, or if you will subscribe to that idea that the things that you have or have owned to this point do not belong to you, real transformation begins to take place. That's when real change occurs. It changes your attitude, it changes your behavior, it changes everything. Like, there's a story of this woman who, she was in the airport and she was waiting on her connecting flight, and while she was waiting, she went to the cafe or the kiosk and she got a newspaper and she got a bag of cookies. And she went and sat down and she begins opening the newspaper and reading it. And while she's reading the newspaper, she hears this rustling on the table in front of her, and she looks behind the newspaper and she sees this guy sitting beside her opening her bag of cookies. And she didn't want to create a stir, but she was like, what is going on? Like, what's he doing with my cookies? And so he opens her bag of cookies and he takes a cookie. And so, not to be mean, but to make a point, she leans down and she grabs a cookie out of her bag and she eats a cookie. And over time, he continues to eat her cookies, and she continues to try to, I'm taking one of mine too, eating a cookie and looking at him, giving him the evil eye. And to make matters worse, like there's one cookie left, and this stranger eating her cookies takes the cookie out of her bag, breaks the cookie in half, and gives her half of her cookie, while he eats the other half. Well, so they ate through the whole bag of cookies, and then her flight was called, and when she gets up and reaches into her bag to get out her ticket, as she opens her purse, she sees her unopened bag of cookies still in her bag. Coming to grips with whose cookies they are changes everything, doesn't it? Psalm 24:1 says this, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. And I think this is where we get a little bit confused. Like this passage says, the earth belongs to the Lord. How much stuff that's in this earth belongs to Him? Everything. Everything. Well, what's left after that? Not much. Right? These are God's cookies. This is God's house. These are God's clothes. It's God's IRA. It's God's car. It's God's your time, energy, your body. All God's. It's all God's. It's all God's stuff. And I want to think it's mine. I'd like to assure myself that I've earned some of this and I'm entitled to some of this, because it sort of makes me feel good knowing that I've earned it. It sort of makes me feel secure about myself. In some ways it does give me security. Like if I think I get that and I finally do, I feel secure that I got it. It also kind of becomes this sense of pride that look at all this stuff I've got. It raises our social status at times when we get certain things. Like we want to believe that it's our stuff. We even get anxious about our stuff. Like it is mine. I do feel proud about this. I do feel secure in this. And now I got to protect it even more. So I get anxious about all this stuff that I have. But in the end, it's not ours. It's all God's stuff. He made it. He thought it up. He's the creator of these bodies and these minds that are capable of working in order to collect a check so that we can buy the things that were made by the materials He put on this earth. Like it's all His. We've just been conditioned to believe it's mine. And that's an after effect of the human condition, the sinful nature. After the fall of Adam, it's pride. That's an after effect of the fall. We think we need this stuff to be ours for our status. Well, this church in the first century, this first Christian community got it. Like they understood it's not mine. And so they're because they realized that and lived that out, their generosity also lends them to believe this truth about our stuff. It's all God's stuff, truth number one. Truth number two, I won't be able to keep God's stuff forever. There was a Holocaust survivor named Corrie ten Boom. When she was late adolescence, young teenager, the Nazis busted into her home and took her and all her family to the concentration camp and took all of their stuff. All their stuff was lost. All of their stuff was gone. And a guy named Chuck Colson interviewed her, and he asked her what she had learned through all of that. And one of her answers was this. She said, I've learned through all of this that we must hold everything loosely, because when I grip it tightly, it hurts when the Father pries my fingers loose and takes it from me. King Solomon, the smartest man, richest man that ever lived, at the end of his life, he looked back on all of his success. He looked back on all of his wealth, and he wrote this. Ecclesiastes 5:15 says, naked a man comes from his mother's womb, and as he comes, so he departs. He takes nothing from his labor that he can carry in his hand. Like, how did you come into the world? Naked. Nothing. And we're going out that way too. Like, it's God's stuff. I can't keep it. I can use it if I want, but I can't keep stuff. And so you know what you are gonna keep though? There are very few things that you are gonna keep. There's very few things you have that are eternal. You will keep this though. You will keep your soul. You will keep your character. You will keep your heart. These are eternal things. Matthew 6:19-21 says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Like the idea is, whatever it is you're pursuing, whatever it is you value most is what shapes you. The things you have are momentary. They won't last. They don't last. They won't make it to the other side of eternity. And so we have to kind of let our minds shift in this way. What we have then, because it's all momentary, isn't important. What we have is not important. How we use what we have is what matters. So how we use what we have is a reflection of our heart. It's a reflection of our character. What will my character allow me to do with the stuff I have? Will I be generous with it like God is? Will I use it to bless other people's lives? Will the hungry get fed because of my character? Will those who don't know Jesus know Him because of my help? Because when I do those things, when I'm generous, Jesus shapes me. Jesus forms me. He does something in me. Their attitude of this first church is, it's not ours. And so if we don't own it and we can't keep it, we'll use it in ways that please the Lord. Like we'll trust that, and we'll trust that if we do use it in ways that please the Lord, He will take care of us. Here's another truth about your stuff, or about generosity. I will always have what I need. I will always have what I need. Corinthians 9:7-8 says this: "Each man should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work." Paul writes in this passage, having all that you need. In kind of ancient times, the Stoics in the ancient world loved this word need. And they believed that the secret to the good life is in not getting all the things that you desire. The secret to the good life is becoming free of chronic desire. Like Socrates said one time, look at all the things that I don't need. What happened in the first century church through Jesus is they found themselves freed from unsatisfied desire. Because they found the one who fulfills all desires. Throughout history, people who have found Jesus, or people who Jesus has captivated, He cures them of this demand for more. There's a story of a man who was in search of simplicity, and he went to this monastery, right, where the monks live. And the monks, if you know, live life at its most basic level. And in this place where he was staying for a few days, there were very little creature comforts, that's the way the monks had chosen to live. And so these monks wanted to liberate him from this desire for more. And so a monk showed the man to his room and said to him, if there's anything you need, let us know. And we'll show you how to get along without it. See, when believers live in generosity, God meets their needs. And the church in Acts 2 was living proof. I will always have what I need. Here's the final truth about stuff that I want to share with you this morning that I think we learned from this first century church, the first church. When I give, I benefit. When I give, I benefit. Giving, serving and giving is about growing. You and me growing. And Paul says that one of the ways that you enter into this world of Jesus is through the practice of generosity. And so this morning I want to run through about 4 levels of giving, and I'd like to invite you to do a little self-diagnosis and ask yourself where you would put yourself right now and where you'd like to be. And I'll be honest about this. Preachers don't like to talk about money and don't like to talk about giving because you don't like to hear about money and giving. And so it's like this awkward tension. But the truth is Jesus talks about money more often than just about anything else. Because money is one of the most practical, concrete ways or evidences that Jesus has you, right? And I want you to know this too. Here, we're not going to pressure you to give. We're not going to look at your numbers and call you. And it's up to you and whether or not Jesus has you, and whether you want to be more like Jesus. So I want to leave that there as I go here. So I want to walk you through these like 4 stages of giving that I think most of us go through, or most people go through. Like, here's what happens. Someone comes to know Jesus and they haven't thought much about giving. And money at this point has been how you keep score. Like, money is how you get to where you want to go. So at this point, you've never given it away. And then Jesus comes along and he grips your heart, and then you find out about giving. And then there's often this like starter level of giving. This level, we'll call it level 1. And so you come to church for a while, and you begin to think, well, I guess it costs something to run this place, to keep the lights on, to pay the rent, and so I'll do my part. I'll put $20 in the basket. And it's kind of like, for some people, it's kind of like going to a concert or going to the movies, right? I'm paying for what I'm getting. It just kind of makes sense. We're wired that way. I ought to chip in something. That's kind of level 1. But the next level is people move to usually is they give to a cause, like something in this world gets your attention. Like the hurricane relief efforts. And seeing people on TV say we need to stand, or the shooting in Vegas, we need to stand as one, we need to come together and give. And you see the news, or you see a story, or you see a third world child on TV and go, it kind of stirs your heart, and you go, you know what, I want to give to that. And that's kind of like level 2, but it's kind of still like this sporadic giving. Like for you, it's still not a way of life, it's just this one time. And that might be level 2. Then people will often move to like this third level of what we call systematic obedience. And for most people, this kind of clicks when they hear about the tithe, this word T-I-T-H-E. And in the Old Testament, God gave Israel the practice of tithing, which meant they would give 10% of their income or their harvest to the Lord. And so tithing involves making a decision to make giving a priority. And so in the early church, we've been talking about this morning, their giving wasn't tithing. It went way beyond tithing. Which leads us to the next level, level 4. But before I go there, I want you to hear this. If you think of tithing as a rule that you are obligated to follow, then it becomes a legalistic thing. And then it becomes, and when something becomes legalistic in the church, or when you begin to see something as legalistic, it becomes a killer. Like you don't give cheerfully. And maybe the number 1 question people ask when it comes to tithe is, am I supposed to give tithe on the gross or the net? Well, that's not catching the spirit of tithing. Tithing is sort of like training wheels for most of us who are able to give more. Like it's a starting point. Because the 4th level is this, the last level is this, and this is the level we see this first church living out. Level 4 would be what we would call spirit-directed generosity. And this is what the church in Acts was living. Now I no longer see my stuff as mine. Now it's become an opportunity. The stuff I have is an opportunity to trust God and realize that I'm really finding my security, my confidence, and my freedom in Him. I completely trust that God will supply my needs. at this level, then giving increasingly becomes like a spiritual adventure. Like you look forward to it. You even get excited about it. You get creative with it. You pray about it. And people at this level begin thinking like this: what if we were, as a family, like cap our lifestyle here? Like we make this much, but we could live on this much. What if we capped our lifestyle here and the rest we just blessed people with? We gave it away and blew people away with our generosity and made a difference in people's lives. That's how people at this level begin to think. People at this level also begin to think like, how could we teach our kids to be generous? Is that something we want to teach our kids? Isn't that a big, do you ever get sick of your kids just wanting? You know what I mean? Isn't generosity something we want to teach our kids? I love this. Like when we started this church, one of the first things we did was we went down to the park and we handed out cold water bottles, and then there was this lawnmower brigade, and we mowed random people's yards through a few neighborhoods back here, and then we took our very first offering. We took every dollar of our first offering and we bought a car and gave it away to a grandmother, gave it away to CJ. And what I loved about that is all of the kids helped. Pass out water bottles, cut grass. All of the a ton of the kids were here when we gave the car away. And watching families work together and serve together and be generous together, like I love this. Like what do our kids learn about life and generosity when they give and serve with you, their parents? Like what do they learn about Jesus when they do that? Here's what I think. I think generosity is one of the primary ways that your kids see Jesus in you. I also think that generosity is one of the primary ways that the world sees Jesus in you. Like you can say you love Jesus and you go to church every week and you believe this, but the world is suspicious of talk. It's suspicious of talk. Like they want to see somebody in love with Jesus. They want to see what that looks like and what that means. And generosity is one of the primary ways when we live open-handedly and are giving rather than consuming. It's one of the primary ways that people see the love of Jesus in us. Like we can talk all day long about how we love Jesus and Jesus is our leader, but until we begin to give things away, until we take our time and our energy and our resources and begin to give and be generous with those things, everything else is just words. So giving and serving become concrete, obvious, measurable, evident ways that Jesus is at work in us. I think it causes eyebrows to raise. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of like my goal in life. When it comes to how I live for Jesus out there, I want to do things that make people go, oh, you do believe this Jesus stuff. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to just say it. I want to do things that not shock people, but raise their eyebrows. And so as a church of the Crossroads, I don't want to be known for what we say or just what we say. I want us to be known by our actions and our contributions. So this value, we contribute more than we consume. As a church, there are three ways I would love to see this lived out in your life and corporately as a church. Here's what we kind of have written down so that we don't forget and so that we know clearly. We contribute more than we consume, and it will be demonstrated like this. 1, regularly serving on a ministry team. And this is kind of the moment where if you've been coming here for the last 5 or 6 weeks and you've bought in, like this is now home for you, you would call this home, you're all in. We want to encourage you, be all in and give you the opportunity to do that. So out in the lobby, there are sign-up sheets for many of our ministry teams across the board that help make this happen on Sunday mornings. We would love for you to serve and be a part of one of these teams that makes Sunday mornings happen here. We want you to be all in that way. The second way it will be demonstrated is this: by creating or participating in an opportunity to serve your neighbor or our city. So we're doing some of these things like our Halloween block parties. Those are like corporate adventures together. But we hope you will get creative on your own or as a family and love your neighbor well or love the city well. So that's the second way. The third way it will be demonstrated is this: by financially giving or investing in Church of the Crossroads weekly. Like this is you investing in what God has got going on right here. It's like this is God's church committed to sharing the gospel. So when you give here, you're giving to the greatest cause ever. You're giving to the hope of this world. Investing in the fight to keep people from going to hell, sharing Jesus, the hope for everyone. Like we've already done something creative, something cool, and something important. We started a church. But you are able to be here because a group of 70 people who began to meet with me this summer chose to begin to give this summer. And so they began to give this summer with you in mind so that we get to open the doors and have all this stuff, all this cool stuff, so that you would have a place to come and meet Jesus, grow in Jesus, a place to serve and be like Jesus. So those 70 people, because of their generosity, you are here. Like your kids have a staffed kids ministry because people have been generous with their time and sacrifice being able to come in here. Would they love to be in here? They absolutely would. But they give up their time in here to minister to your kids back there so that your kids can grow in Jesus and you don't have to babysit them while you're in here. Like all of this is a product of somebody else's generosity. They invested in God's work with you in mind even before you darkened the doors your first Sunday. This is a product of their generosity and their investment in God's kingdom. So if you, this morning, if you are a committed follower of Christ and you are looking for a church home, whether it's here or not, you need to find a church home. And whatever church it is that you call home, contribute to your home. Contribute to the work that's happening in your church. You need to be an investor. You need to be a contributor. You need to be a servant for what God is doing in your church home. Serve and go above and beyond with your time, with your energy and resources. I'm excited about what's happening here. Every week I'm blown away. Like we're 6 weeks old. We already had 4 baptisms. Like when we started this summer, we had 70 people. We now have about 250 people each week in here on Sundays. It's blown away my dream and what I envisioned for what the first couple months would be in this place. But I got bigger dreams than just this for our church. Like if God can do this with just 70 people, what can He do with 250 who don't see their stuff as their own, but see it as see your stuff and your resources, your time and energy as a way to bless others, as a way to make Jesus famous, as a way to glorify God. What could our generosity together do for this city? I believe if we think like that, if we buy in like that, I think we become dangerous together. I mean that. Now, I don't mean it in a threatening way. Not a terroristic way. You know what I mean? But this is what I mean by that. I think we become dangerous because we become a threat, not to people, but to people's brokenness. Our generosity, we become a threat to people to people's loneliness. We become a threat to people's sickness. We become a threat to people's poverty. Like for us, if we come together, 250 of us sold out to being generous for the sake of God's kingdom, our acts of service, but may our love and our acts of service and acts of generosity connect people with Jesus. May the broken be fixed, the sick be healed, the hurting be comforted, the lonely be befriended. May the lost be found and the sinner be saved because of what we do. And I hope our community, I hope Mount Washington will never be the same ever again because we're here. Because we bring the love of Jesus And may we just absolutely bring it. I mean, bring it. Last thought. There was a guy. This was a newspaper article I read a while back, but there was this janitor slash dry cleaner who was 102 years old when he died. I read about this. When he died, this janitor dry cleaner left over $2 million to a Christian school. And because he was just a janitor dry cleaner, I mean, everybody was blown away that he had lived such a frugal life. Like, nobody had any idea he was as wealthy as he was. And I bet on his deathbed, I bet he did not say, well, I wish I'd have spent more on me. I wish I hadn't given so much away. I bet he didn't say that. For many people, money is a source of anxiety, pressure, and burden. For many people, money and the things we have are a scorekeeper. But for all, it doesn't have to be. It really can be the source of joy. And I think it becomes a source of joy when we let go of it, when we don't see it as our own, when we leverage it for God's purposes. Let's pray.